So you're convinced you're starting a construction company. But if you're planning to succeed, you need to realize one thing. You aren't in the business of building things. You're in the business of managing debt and cash flow. And the moment you mistake one for the other, you're already out of business. Here's the gut punch. Construction has one of the highest small business failure rates of any industry in the country. And it's almost never because the work was bad. The tradespeople who go under aren't the ones who can't frame a wall or run a conduit. They're the ones who never learned that construction isn't really a building business. It's a cash flow business that happens to build things. And the businesses that survive are the ones where someone understood that distinction before they ever pulled a permit. Let me break down what you're actually buying into. First, the taxonomy. Construction company covers a wide range of genuinely different businesses, and each one carries a different risk profile even though they all involve a hammer and a hard hat. There's the general contractor, the one who holds the client relationship, pulls the permits, and coordinates the whole project, but subcontracts most of the actual labor out to specialty trades. There's the specialty trade subcontractor, electricians, plumbers, HVAC, framers, concrete crews, who work under a general contractor on someone else's project, with less client-facing risk but also less control over payment timing, since they're paid on the GC's schedule rather than negotiating directly with the end client. There's the residential remodeler, typically smaller scale, higher client-facing communication demands, and often the most volatile cash flow because homeowners are a much less predictable payer than a commercial client with a signed contract and a bonding company behind it. And there's the developer-builder, who takes on land and financing risk on top of construction risk, building spec homes or projects to sell rather than working for a client at all, a fundamentally different, much higher risk business where the company itself becomes the client, and there's nobody else's payment schedule to fall back on if the market shifts mid-build. For this breakdown, we're building the numbers around a mid-sized general contracting firm doing residential and light commercial work, the most common entry point for a tradesperson going independent, and also where the gap between I know how to build things and I know how to run a construction company is widest. Entry costs. The instinct is to think the barrier to entry is low. You need tools, a truck, and a license. That's true, and it's exactly why so many people jump into this business without realizing the real barrier is somewhere else entirely. Licensing and bonding varies by state and trade, but expect several hundred to a few $1,000s for initial contractor licensing, plus a surety bond, typically $5,000 to $25,000 in bond value, depending on your state and project size, which usually costs 1% to 15% of the bond amount annually depending on your credit and experience. This bond isn't optional decoration. It's what allows you to legally bid on most licensed work, and a thin credit history or limited track record can push that annual cost toward the higher end of the range right when you can least afford it. General liability insurance for a construction business, given the injury and property damage risk, commonly runs several thousand to tens of thousands of dollars a year depending on your trade and revenue. Workers' compensation insurance, if you have any employees at all, is mandatory in nearly every state and can run a significant percentage of your total payroll, often 10 to 25% or more for higher risk trades like roofing, where the injury rate alone drives the premium well above what a lower risk trade like interior finish work would pay for the same headcount. Equipment and vehicles are the visible cost. A work truck, basic tools, maybe a trailer, but this is genuinely the smaller line item. A functional startup equipment package can run $20,000 to $80,000 depending on your trade, far less than the storage or gym facilities we've covered on this channel. This is part of why construction looks deceptively cheap to start compared to those other businesses. The sticker price on tools and a truck is nothing like the sticker price on a building. The real entry cost, the one that catches people off guard, is working capital. Construction is a business where you often have to pay for materials and subcontracted labor before you get paid by the client, and the gap between those two events, sometimes 30, 60, even 90 days, has to be bridged with cash you already have. A contractor starting out with insufficient working capital isn't undercapitalized because they misjudged the tools budget. They're undercapitalized because they didn't understand that they're effectively financing their clients' projects out of pocket until payment clears, and that financing role is the actual business, whether or not anyone described it to them that way when they got their license. There's a quieter entry cost underneath all of this that almost nobody prices in ahead of time: the sales and estimating function itself. Winning work isn't free. Every bid you put together takes real hours, pricing materials, walking the site, drafting a scope of work, and most contractors lose the majority of the bids they submit. A contractor who wins 1 out of every 3 or 4 competitive bids is doing well by industry norms, which means the labor cost of the bids that didn't win has to be absorbed by the margin on the ones that did. First-time owners frequently underprice this entirely, treating estimating as a free activity they do in the evenings, right up until the volume of unpaid bidding work starts eating into the hours they'd otherwise spend running paid jobs. The hidden costs are where construction gets genuinely dangerous for a first-time owner. The pay-when-paid cash flow gap is the biggest one, and it compounds across every project running simultaneously. If you've got 3 jobs going at once, each one 30 to 60 days behind on payment relative to when you paid your subs and suppliers, you can be running a profitable business on paper while being cash flow insolvent in practice, unable to make payroll despite having real profit sitting in unpaid invoices. This is the single most common reason technically successful contractors still go under. The accounting statement says profitable, the bank account says otherwise, and the bank account is the one that determines whether Friday's payroll clears. Change order disputes are the next trap. Construction projects rarely go exactly to the original scope. Clients want changes, unexpected conditions get discovered once walls are opened up, and every one of those changes needs to be priced, documented, and agreed to in writing before the work happens. Contractors who do the extra work first and try to bill for it after almost always end up eating some or all of that cost, because a client who didn't sign off in advance has enormous leverage to simply refuse to pay for work they claim they never authorized. The contractors who protect themselves here treat paperwork as seriously as the physical work itself, which is a discipline that has nothing to do with how good they are with a saw. Warranty and callback liability is a cost that shows up long after the project is finished and the crew has moved on. Most contracts carry an explicit or implied warranty period, and defects, a leak, a crack, a system that fails, can surface months or years later, requiring the contractor to send a crew back out at their own cost to fix work they've already been paid for and already spent the profit on. A single significant callback on a project the owner assumed was closed out and profitable can erase a meaningful share of that project's original margin, sometimes more than the entire margin, if the defect involves something structural or systems related rather than cosmetic. Weather and schedule delays hit construction harder than almost any other business on this channel, because a delayed project doesn't just delay revenue, it often means paying a crew to stand idle, or worse, losing that crew to another job because you couldn't keep them busy, then scrambling to rehire or re-subcontract once the weather clears. A string of bad weather weeks during a tight seasonal window can push a project's completion into the next season entirely, compounding the delay well beyond the actual number of lost working days. And bonding capacity is the quiet ceiling on growth that most new owners don't see coming. Bonding companies extend surety credit based on your financial statements, your track record, and your current backlog, and once you hit your bonding capacity, you simply cannot bid on new bonded work, regardless of how much demand exists, until existing projects close out and free up capacity. Growing too fast without managing this can leave a contractor turning down profitable work simply because they've maxed out what a bonding company will underwrite, which is a strange kind of failure mode, too much demand, not too little, that first-time owners rarely anticipate. Now, the real profit mechanism, because this is where construction economics actually work, once you understand the cash flow game underneath it. The core engine is markup on subcontracted labor and materials. A general contractor typically marks up subcontractor costs somewhere between 10 and 20%, and materials somewhere in a similar range, meaning the GC's profit comes not from doing the physical work themselves, but from coordinating, scheduling, and taking on the risk of managing multiple trades toward a finished result the client actually wants. This is why a GC's real skill set is closer to project management and risk allocation than to swinging a hammer. And it's also why some of the most successful GCs in a given market are people who are only moderately skilled tradespeople themselves, but are exceptional schedulers, negotiators, and cash flow managers. The volume versus margin trade-off is the central strategic decision in this business. A contractor can chase high volume at thin margins, lots of projects, aggressive bidding to win work, relying on turning over cash quickly, or can chase fewer, higher margin projects with better clients and less competitive bidding, accepting slower revenue growth in exchange for healthier cash flow per job. Contractors who try to do both at once, high volume and thin margins, are the ones most exposed to the cash flow gap becoming fatal, because there's no margin cushion to absorb a single slow-paying client or a single expensive change order dispute, and high volume means more simultaneous exposure to exactly that risk across more projects at once. And the float, the gap between paying your subcontractors and getting paid by your client, is something disciplined contractors actively manage rather than passively hope works out. This means negotiating payment terms with subs that better match your own receivables timeline, requiring deposits or progress payments from clients before work begins rather than only at completion, and maintaining a cash reserve specifically sized to cover payroll and sub payments during the gap, rather than assuming the next payment will always arrive on schedule. Contractors who master this float essentially run a small, informal financing operation alongside their construction work, whether they think of it that way or not. This is also where subcontractor relationships become a genuine competitive advantage rather than just a vendor list. Good subs, the ones who show up on time, do quality work, and don't need to be chased down, have options. They can choose which GCs they prioritize when their own schedule is tight. And the GCs who pay reliably and on time get first pick of the best crews, while the GCs with a reputation for slow payment get pushed to the back of the line or have to pay a premium to secure the same subs. This becomes a compounding advantage over time. Reliable payment attracts better subs deliver more consistent quality and fewer callbacks protect margin, and protected margin makes it easier to keep paying subs reliably. The reverse spiral runs just as fast in the other direction, and it's often what actually kills a struggling contractor well before the cash runs out completely. The good subs simply stop taking their calls. Structural risk and a case study. The core structural risk in this business is concentration. A construction company's revenue is often concentrated in a small number of large projects at any given time, which means a single project going bad, whether through client non-payment, a major change order dispute, or a client's own bankruptcy mid-project, can threaten the entire company in a way that would be diversified away in a business with hundreds of small transactions instead of 5 large ones. This dynamic played out visibly in the collapse of several large general contractors and construction firms over the years that took on major projects with thin margins and got caught by cost overruns, client payment disputes, or their own subcontractors' financial instability cascading upward. The common thread in these failures usually isn't that the company couldn't build, it's that a concentrated bet on a small number of large thin margin projects left no room to absorb the kind of disruption that, on a smaller or more diversified project, would have been a manageable loss instead of a company ending one. A contractor with 20 small jobs can absorb one bad client. A contractor with 3 enormous jobs often cannot. Bull versus bear. In the bull case, you've got a contractor with disciplined client vetting, checking payment history and financial stability before signing a contract, a healthy, diversified backlog across multiple mid-size projects, rather than dependence on 1 or 2 large ones, strong subcontractor relationships built on paying them reliably and on time, and pricing discipline that protects margin even when it means losing some bids to cheaper competitors. That contractor can build a genuinely durable business, with net margins commonly in the 5 to 15% range, thin by the standards of some other businesses on this channel, but stable and repeatable when cash flow is actively managed, and often supplemented by a strong reputation that generates repeat and referral work at healthier margins than competitive bid work ever provides. In the bear case, you're a contractor who's grown revenue quickly by underbidding competitors and taking on projects beyond your bonding and cash flow capacity. You've got 2 or 3 large projects concentrated with the same handful of clients, one of whom is now disputing a change order or slow paying altogether. Your subcontractors are starting to demand payment upfront because your reputation for timely payment has slipped, and you're one more delayed payment away from being unable to make payroll despite having a backlog that looks impressive on paper. That contractor can go from apparently thriving to insolvent within a matter of months, and often does, because the same backlog that looked like strength was actually concentrated fragility the whole time. The reframe. You didn't start a business building things. You started a business absorbing risk and managing cash flow timing, with a hammer attached. Your actual product isn't the finished structure, it's your ability to coordinate dozens of moving parts, extend credit to clients in the form of work performed before payment, and survive the gap between spending money and collecting it, project after project, without ever running out of cash in between. The contractors who last aren't necessarily the best builders. They're the ones who treated the financial mechanics of the business with the same seriousness they treated the technical trade, and who understood that the hammer was never really the point. So that's the real economics of owning a construction company.